The words sliced through the restaurant's ambient chatter like a blade through silk. She's nothing but a mistake I can't seem to undo. I felt my breath catch in my throat as my husband's voice carried across the dim-lit booth behind me. The woman he was speaking to, a brunette in an elegant black dress, leaned forward with practiced sympathy, her manicured fingers touching his arm. "A mistake?" she prompted, her voice honey-smooth. "The biggest one of my life," Caspian continued, his tone dripping with contempt I'd never heard before. "Tanya thinks she's so smart with her little teaching job, but she's pathetic. Clingy, naive, boring. I only married her because—" He paused, taking a sip of wine. "Well, let's just say I needed the stability while I built my real life." My hands trembled against my wine glass. We were supposed to be celebrating our 5th anniversary. He told me he was running late, asked me to wait at the bar. I'd been sitting here for 30 minutes, watching him through the mirror behind the bar as he charmed this mysterious woman. "And she has no idea?" the woman asked, her voice carrying a dangerous edge I couldn't quite place. "None whatsoever. She's too trusting, too stupid to see what's right in front of her face. I mean, this woman still believes I work late every night at the firm." He laughed, cruel and sharp. "She's like a puppy that keeps coming back no matter how many times you kick it." The restaurant seemed to spin around me. 5 years. 5 years of believing in us, of making his favorite meals, of defending him to friends who whispered concerns, of blaming myself when he grew distant. "Tell me more about this mistake," the woman said, and something in her tone made Caspian shift uncomfortably. "She's just ordinary. Her family's nothing special. Her parents died when she was young, raised by some older sister who joined the military and disappeared. No connections, no money, no ambition. She actually thinks teaching kindergarten is meaningful work." His laugh was bitter. "Sometimes I look at her and wonder how I got stuck with someone so utterly forgettable." The woman was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed completely, cold as winter steel. "Forgettable, you say?" "Completely. I mean, who would even care if she just vanished tomorrow? She has no one. She is no one." That's when the woman stood up. Even from behind, I could see the military precision in her movement, the controlled power in her stance. She was tall, imposing, and something about the way she carried herself made the entire restaurant seem to hold its breath. "Caspian Mitchell," she said, her voice now carrying across the entire dining room. "You want to know who would care if Tanya vanished?" Caspian's face went white as paper. How do you know I would care?" She turned slightly and I caught a glimpse of her profile. Sharp, beautiful, achingly familiar. "Because Tanya Elizabeth Howard Mitchell is my baby sister. And you just made the worst mistake of your miserable life." Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. The wine glass slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on the floor as the restaurant fell into complete silence. Every eye turned toward our booth, toward the woman who just stood up like an avenging angel. My sister. My sister who'd been deployed overseas for 3 years. My sister who'd been my guardian, my protector, my everything before she'd left to serve our country. My sister who was supposed to be in Afghanistan, not sitting in Marcello's pretending to be a stranger while my husband destroyed me word by word. "Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Howard," she continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding respect. "Special Forces. And I've been listening to you tear apart the most precious thing in my world for the past 20 minutes. Caspian's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. The woman at the table next to them had her phone out, recording. The maitre d' was frozen halfway across the room. "Tanya," Rachel called, her voice gentler now but still carrying that steel core. "Come here, sweetheart." On shaking legs, I stood and walked toward the booth where my entire life had just imploded. Every step felt like walking through molasses, every breath like swallowing glass. When I reached them, Rachel pulled me into her arms. The same arms that had held me through nightmares after our parents died. The same arms that had taught me to be strong when the world tried to break me. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," she whispered in my ear. "But I'm not sorry, you know the truth." I pulled back to look at her, this sister I'd missed every single day for 3 years. "How long have you been back?" 2 weeks. "I wanted to surprise you," But I needed to see what kind of man you'd married first. So I had him investigated. Her smile was sharp as a blade. And then I decided to meet him myself. Caspian finally found his voice. This is insane. Tanya, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I understand that I've been living with a stranger who thinks I'm a mistake. I understand that everything I believed about my marriage was a lie. Tanya, let me explain. Explain what? Rachel's voice cut through his stammering like a whip. Explain how you've been cheating on my sister for 2 years with your business partner? Explain how you've been telling people she's too stupid to notice? Explain how you married her for her inheritance money and planned to divorce her once you'd gotten what you needed. The color drained from Caspian's face completely. How could you possibly? Because I'm very good at my job, Caspian. And my job is gathering intelligence on threats to the people I'm sworn to protect. You became a threat to my sister the moment you decided to marry her under false pretenses. The restaurant was silent except for the soft sound of phones recording and the distant clatter from the kitchen. I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on us, but for the first time in years I didn't feel small. I felt seen. The inheritance, I said slowly, pieces clicking together. You asked me to put you on the account 3 months after we married. Tanya. You said it was for our future. You said you wanted us to build something together. My voice was getting stronger with each word. But there is no us, is there? There never was. Caspian's expensive suit couldn't hide the sweat breaking out across his forehead. You're blowing this out of proportion. Everyone says things they don't mean when they're what? Rachel stepped closer to him and I was reminded that my sister had spent 3 years learning very dangerous skills. When they're describing in detail how they plan to psychologically manipulate someone until they break. When they're laughing about how easy it is to gaslight someone who loves them. You recorded us, Caspian whispered, his face ashen. I recorded everything. Rachel's smile was predatory. Every conversation, every meeting, every phone call. Did you know that emotional and financial abuse are grounds for fault-based divorce in this state? Did you know that fraudulent inducement to marriage can result in criminal charges? I stared at my sister. This woman who'd always been my protector but had become something fiercer, more dangerous in the years she'd been away. You've been investigating him for 2 weeks? I've been watching him destroy you for 2 weeks, she corrected. Watching him come home to you and pretend to be the loving husband while he was planning your emotional demolition. Watching him meet with lawyers about how to take half your inheritance in a divorce. Watching him practice speeches about how you were mentally unstable, so he could claim you were unfit to manage your own finances. Each word hit like a physical blow. I sank into the booth, my legs no longer able to hold me up. 5 years. 5 years of being slowly, systematically broken down. 5 years of believing his criticisms, his subtle put-downs, his constant implications that I was lucky he stayed with me. The worst part, Rachel continued, her voice deadly quiet, is that he actually believed he was clever. He thought he was the smart one manipulating the naive little schoolteacher. He never stopped to wonder why someone as ordinary as you had a $250,000 inheritance from parents who were nothing special. Caspian's eyes widened. What are you talking about? You never asked about our parents, did you? Never wondered why Tanya was so well provided for by people you assumed were insignificant. Rachel's laugh was cold. Dr. James Howard was a pediatric surgeon. Dr. Maria Santos Howard was a neurosurgeon. They died in a car accident coming back from a medical conference where they just donated $1 million to children's cancer research. I watched Caspian's face as the implications sank in. The inheritance he'd married me for was a fraction of what he could have had if he'd simply been a decent human being. If he'd actually loved me. But that's not even the best part, Rachel continued. The best part is that I've been sitting here for 20 minutes, recording you confess to a restaurant full of witnesses that you committed marriage fraud, emotional abuse and financial manipulation. The best part is that half these people have their phones out and by tomorrow morning, everyone in your social and professional circles will know exactly what kind of man you really are. Caspian looked around the restaurant as if seeing the crowd for the first time. Faces stared back at him. Some shocked, some disgusted, some grimly satisfied. I recognized several people from his law firm, clients, neighbors from our building. You can't do this, he whispered. I already have. Rachel pulled out her phone and showed him the screen. Live streamed to my social media accounts. 47,000 viewers and counting. The recording is already backed up in 6 different locations. This is illegal. Recording someone in a public place? No, Caspian, that's perfectly legal. What's illegal is marrying someone under false pretenses with the intent to defraud them. What's illegal is financial abuse. What's illegal is the identity theft you committed when you opened credit cards in Tanya's name without her knowledge. My head snapped up. What credit cards? 53,000 in debt, all in your name, all maxed out. Money he used to wine and dine his business partner while telling you the firm was struggling and you needed to cut back on groceries. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating that I felt oddly calm. Like I'd gone past pain into some strange place where nothing could hurt me anymore. Tanya, Caspian turned to me, his voice pleading. You have to understand, I never meant for things to go this far. I do care about you, I just got caught. I stood up slowly, surprised by how steady I felt. You got caught and now you're scared. I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling, we can't do anything, I said quietly. Because there is no we. There never was a we. There was just you using me and me too trusting to see it. Tanya. Stop saying my name. The words came out harder than I'd intended. You don't get to say my name anymore. You don't get to pretend we're on the same side when you've been working against me from day one. Rachel moved to stand beside me, her presence solid and reassuring. The divorce papers are already filed. Fault-based, citing fraud and abuse. The restraining order goes into effect in 1 hour. Restraining order? Caspian's voice cracked. You threatened my sister's mental and financial well-being. You systematically isolated her from support systems and manipulated her into believing she was worthless. In my professional opinion, you're a threat to her continued safety. I looked at Caspian, really looked at him, for what I knew would be the last time. This man who'd shared my bed, who'd eaten meals I'd cooked with love, who'd held me when I cried about missing my sister. This stranger who'd seen my grief and loneliness as weaknesses to exploit. I loved you, I said simply. I actually loved you. And you looked at that love as something contemptible, something to be used. Tanya. No. I held up a hand. You called me a mistake. You said I was forgettable. You said no one would care if I disappeared. I felt tears threatening, but they weren't tears of pain anymore. They were tears of release. But you were wrong about everything. You were wrong about my family, wrong about my worth, and most importantly, wrong about thinking you could break me and get away with it. I turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at him one more time. The biggest mistake here wasn't me marrying you, Caspian. It was you underestimating who I really am. And who my family is. Rachel and I walked out of Marcello's together, leaving Caspian sitting alone in a booth surrounded by strangers who'd witnessed his complete destruction. Behind us, I could hear the murmur of conversation starting up again, phones buzzing with notifications, the sound of a life being dissected in real time. Outside, the cool evening air felt like absolution. 3 days later, I sat in the law offices of Howard and Associates, the firm my parents had established before I was born, the firm that Rachel had inherited and turned over to trusted partners when she'd enlisted. The firm that Caspian had somehow never connected to my maiden name. The financial damage is extensive but not irreparable, Attorney Mateo was saying, sliding documents across the mahogany table. We've frozen all the fraudulent accounts, filed complaints with the credit bureaus, and initiated proceedings to recover the stolen funds. Rachel sat beside me, still in her dress uniform. She'd been called back to active duty but had requested emergency leave to handle what she called a family security issue. What about the criminal charges? She asked. The district attorney is very interested in the case. Marriage fraud, identity theft, financial abuse. It's a prosecutor's dream. Especially with the recorded confession and the public nature of the incident. I stared out the window at the city below. It felt surreal to be sitting in my parents' old office, discussing the destruction of my marriage like it was a military operation. Which I supposed it was. How long have you known? I asked Rachel. Known what? That something was wrong. You didn't just happen to come back early from deployment and decide to investigate my husband for fun. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Do you remember the last video call we had? 3 months ago. I nodded. We talked every few weeks when she could get signal, Brief conversations that kept us connected across continents. You looked different. Smaller. You kept apologizing for things that weren't your fault, kept saying you didn't want to bother me with your problems. But mostly you looked afraid. Afraid. Of saying the wrong thing. Of taking up too much time. Of being too much trouble. Rachel's voice was gentle but steel ran underneath it. I'd seen that look before, Tanya. In women who'd been systematically broken down by people who were supposed to love them. Attorney Mateo cleared his throat. If I may, Mrs. Mitchell. Miss Howard, I corrected automatically. I'm going back to my maiden name. Miss Howard. There's something else we need to discuss. Your husband's business partner, Angela Reed, has been attempting to contact you. The woman he's been having an affair with? Among other things. It appears Ms. Reed was under the impression that you were aware of the arrangement. She's been surprised by recent developments. I almost laughed. She thought I knew my husband was cheating on me and was fine with it? According to her communications with Mr. Mitchell, yes. He apparently told her you were in a modern marriage, where both parties were free to pursue other relationships. Of course he did. I shook my head. Is there any part of my life that wasn't a lie? Rachel reached over and squeezed my hand. Your parents' love for you. My love for you. Your students' love for you. The way you light up when you talk about teaching, the way you stop to pet every dog you see, the way you still leave cookies for the mailman at Christmas. All of that is real, Tanya. All of that is you. For the first time in days I felt something other than numbness. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the possibility of happiness. The distant promise that someday I might feel whole again. What happens now? I asked. Now, Rachel said, standing up and straightening her uniform, we make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Caspian Mitchell is. Not for revenge but for protection. For all the other women who might cross his path. Attorney Mateo nodded. The criminal trial will be public record. His law license is under review by the state bar. And thanks to your sister's social media presence, his reputation in professional circles is permanently damaged. Good, I said, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. He spent 5 years convincing me I was nothing. Let him see what nothing feels like. The trial was set for 6 months later, but Caspian's world began crumbling much sooner than that. I moved back into my parents' old house, the house where Rachel and I had grown up, the house Caspian had always found too small and too dated for his taste. It felt like coming home to myself, surrounded by memories of people who'd actually loved me. Rachel had been granted extended leave to help me navigate the legal proceedings, but more than that, she was helping me remember who I'd been before Caspian started chipping away at my sense of self. You were fierce, she said one evening as we went through old photo albums. Look at this. She showed me a picture from my college graduation. I was grinning at the camera, arms raised in victory, completely unself-conscious and radiant with joy. I don't remember feeling that confident, I said. Because he trained it out of you. Systematically. Every time you expressed joy or pride or excitement, he found a way to diminish it. Remember when you got that teaching award? I did remember. I'd been so excited, had called Caspian immediately to share the news. He'd listened for about 30 seconds before telling me he was busy with real work, and would talk to me later. When I'd brought it up at dinner, he'd said something about participation trophies and changed the subject. He made me feel like everything I cared about was trivial, I realized. That was the point. Abusers don't use their fists anymore, Tanya. They use words, isolation, financial control, gaslighting. They make you complicit in your own diminishment. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and felt my stomach turn over. It's from Angela Reed, I told Rachel. Caspian's business partner. What does she want? I read the message aloud. Tanya, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Caspian and I never meant for things to go this far. Can we talk? I think you'd understand if you knew the whole story. Rachel's expression darkened. Delete it. Don't you want to know what she has to say? I know exactly what she has to say. She wants to explain how this is somehow your fault, how you drove Caspian away with your unreasonable expectations or your lack of understanding. She wants to make herself feel better about helping to destroy a marriage by convincing herself you deserved it. Another text came through. I know you're angry, but Caspian really does care about you. We never wanted to hurt you. There's so much you don't understand about the situation. Block her number, Rachel said firmly. Whatever she wants to say, you don't need to hear it. But as the days passed, the messages kept coming from different numbers. Angela Reed was apparently desperate to tell her side of the story, to somehow justify the unjustifiable. Finally, I decided to meet with her. Angela Reed was nothing like what I'd expected. She was older than me, maybe 40, with carefully styled blonde hair and the kind of expensive clothes that whispered rather than shouted about money. She looked like the kind of woman who belonged in Caspian's world. Polished, sophisticated, successful. She looked like everything I'd been told I wasn't. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where the worst that could happen was public humiliation, which at this point felt like a minor inconvenience. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. Tanya, I need you to know that I never intended for things to go this far. When Caspian told me about your marriage, he made it sound like you two had an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" Angela shifted uncomfortably. "He said you'd grown apart, that you were both just going through the motions. He said you'd even discussed seeing other people." I stared at her. "And you believed him?" "Why wouldn't I? He seemed so genuine about it. He said you were focused on your career, that you'd basically told him you didn't have time for a real relationship anymore." "My career," I repeated slowly. "You mean teaching kindergarten?" For the first time, Angela looked genuinely confused. "Teaching? No, he said you were working on some big research project. Something about child psychology and development. He made it sound very impressive and time-consuming." I felt that familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath my feet. Even his lies had layers. "Angela, I teach 5-year-olds how to tie their shoes and share toys. I come home at 3:30 every day. I cook dinner every night and wait for my husband to come home from work. Except he wasn't at work, was he?" "He was with you." The color drained from Angela's face. "That's not. He said you worked late every night. He said you were barely home." "I was home every night for 5 years. Making his favorite meals, doing his laundry, waiting." Angela stared at her coffee cup, processing this information. "He lied to me. He lied to both of us. But the things he said about you." "What things?" "He said you were cold, distant, that you'd lost interest in him completely, that you barely spoke to each other anymore." I thought about all those evenings I'd tried to engage Caspian in conversation, only to be met with distracted ahas, and "that's nice, honey." I thought about how I'd blamed myself for not being interesting enough, not being worth his attention. Did he ever mention that I called him at work? Called him at work? Every day. Just to check and see how his day was going. Sometimes twice a day if something interesting happened with my students and I wanted to share it. Angela's face was getting whiter by the second. He never mentioned that. He said you never called." "What else did he tell you about me?" She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "He said you were mentally unstable. That you had episodes where you become paranoid and accusatory. He said he was worried about you but didn't know how to help." The words hit hard, but they also brought clarity. Every time I'd questioned Caspian about his late nights, his secretiveness, his distance, he'd responded with concern for my paranoia. He'd suggested I talk to someone, get help for my trust issues. He was setting me up, I realized. If I ever found out about you, if I ever confronted him, he could say I was having a breakdown. That I was seeing things that weren't there. "Oh God," Angela whispered. "What have I done?" "You believed a liar," I said simply. "The question is, what are you going to do now that you know the truth?" Angela looked up at me, tears in her eyes. "I'm going to testify against him. In the criminal trial. I'm going to tell them everything." The weeks leading up to the trial were a revelation in the worst possible way. Once Angela started talking, she couldn't stop. The lies Caspian had told were so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that untangling them required a team of lawyers and accountants. He told Angela that I was independently wealthy and didn't need his financial support. He told his law partners that I was struggling with mental health issues and he was considering having me committed. He told our neighbors that we were having marital problems because I was obsessively jealous and controlling. Every lie was designed to serve a specific purpose in his long-term plan to destroy me while positioning himself as the victim. The most insidious part, Dr. Williams, the forensic psychologist working with our legal team, explained, is that he created a narrative where any normal reaction you had to his abuse would be seen as evidence of your instability. How do you mean? If you questioned him about working late, you were paranoid. If you expressed hurt about his emotional distance, you were needy. If you tried to discuss problems in your marriage, you were creating drama. He systematically reframed every healthy emotional response as a character flaw. Rachel, who'd been sitting quietly through this explanation, finally spoke up. It's psychological warfare. Exactly. And it's particularly effective because it isolates the victim from their support system. Who wants to be around someone who's constantly creating problems or being dramatic? I thought about how I'd gradually stopped calling friends when Caspian was around because he'd make faces or comments about me gossiping. How I'd stopped inviting people over because he'd complain afterward about the mess or the noise. How I'd slowly, without even realizing it, made my world smaller and smaller until it consisted of just me and him. The goal, Dr. Williams continued, was to make you completely dependent on him for your sense of reality. Once he achieved that, he could convince you of anything, including the idea that you were lucky he stayed with you despite your many flaws. It almost worked, I admitted. But it didn't, Rachel said firmly. Because when it mattered most, you recognized the truth. You didn't make excuses for him or try to rationalize what you heard in that restaurant. You believed your own ears instead of his lies. The trial was still months away, but Caspian's professional life was already in ruins. The video of that night at Marcello's had been shared thousands of times. Legal blogs were analyzing the case. His law firm had quietly asked him to take a leave of absence while they reviewed the situation. But the personal consequences were more satisfying than anything the legal system could dish out. Caspian's mother called me on a Tuesday. I almost didn't answer. I'd been screening calls for weeks, but something made me pick up. Tanya, dear, it's Margaret. Caspian's mother had always been kind to me, though distant. She was old-fashioned, formal, the kind of woman who sent handwritten thank you notes and expected them in return. Hello, Mrs. Mitchell. I've been trying to reach Caspian, but he's not returning my calls. I was hoping you might know why. I paused, unsure how much she knew about the situation. Mrs. Mitchell, are you aware that Caspian and I are getting divorced? Silence on the other end of the line. Then, divorced? When did this happen? Caspian never said anything. It's been in the news quite a bit. There was an incident at a restaurant. Oh my dear girl, I don't follow social media or read those gossip websites. Are you telling me my son is getting divorced and didn't have the courtesy to inform his own mother? I found myself in the strange position of having to explain to my mother-in-law that her son was a serial liar and emotional abuser. I did it as gently as possible, but there was no soft way to deliver that kind of news. I see, she said when I finished. Her voice had gone very cold, very formal. And the restaurant incident you mentioned? It's on YouTube, I said quietly. If you want to see for yourself. Margaret Mitchell hung up without another word. 3 days later, I received a handwritten note in the mail. Dear Tanya, I owe you an apology that is long overdue. I raised my son to be a gentleman, and I have clearly failed in that endeavor. After watching the video of his behavior at Marcello's, I am ashamed to call him my child. I want you to know that you have always been a credit to our family, and Caspian's treatment of you is inexcusable. I have spoken with my attorney about removing him from my will and trust. A man who would speak about his wife in such terms does not deserve to inherit what his father and I worked so hard to build. I hope someday you can forgive a foolish old woman who should have seen the signs sooner. With deep regret and respect, Margaret Mitchell. I showed the letter to Rachel, who whistled low. His own mother disowned him. I feel bad for her, I said, and I meant it. She's 78 years old and just discovered her son is a monster. Don't feel too bad. She raised him. But it wasn't just his family turning against him. Angela Reed had been systematically contacting every woman Caspian had ever dated, every female colleague, every woman in his social circle. What she discovered painted a picture of a serial manipulator who'd been running variations of the same con for years. There's a pattern, she told me over coffee. We'd been meeting regularly, not as friends exactly but as fellow survivors of the same predator. He targets women who are isolated or vulnerable in some way. Professional women who are focused on their careers and might not have time to investigate inconsistencies. Women who've lost family members and are looking for stability. Women who make enough money to be useful but not enough to be threatening. How many? At least 4 that I can confirm. Maybe more. The thought made me sick. How many other women had sat where I'd sat, wondering what was wrong with them, why they couldn't make their husband happy. They're going to testify, Angela continued. All of them. The prosecutor says it establishes a pattern of fraud and abuse. Good. Tanya, there's something else. Something I think you need to know before the trial. I braced myself. Over the past few months, I'd learned that every time someone said, "There's something you need to know," it was invariably something I didn't want to hear. Caspian never worked late. Not once. His secretary confirmed it. He left the office at 5 p.m. every day and never came back. Then where was he? With me usually. But not always. Angela looked uncomfortable. He had other interests. Other women. I wasn't the only one. The betrayal was so complete, so overwhelming, that I'd gone past hurt into a kind of numbness. It was like finding out someone had been slowly poisoning you for years. The relief of finally knowing the truth almost outweighed the horror of what they'd done. How many others? I don't know. But Tanya, the financial investigation turned up some things. He wasn't just stealing from you. He was running credit card scams, taking money from client accounts, even stealing from his own law firm. I stared at her. He's going to prison. For a very long time. The courthouse was packed with reporters the day Caspian's trial began. What had started as a simple divorce case had snowballed into a major news story. A cautionary tale about manipulation, abuse, and the power of social media to expose predators. I wore my mother's pearls and my father's wedding ring on a chain around my neck. Armor made of love and memory. Caspian looked smaller than I remembered, sitting at the defendant's table in an expensive suit that couldn't hide the fact that he'd lost weight and gained gray hair. He didn't look at me once during the proceedings. The prosecutor, Janet Reyes, was a small woman with steel in her voice. She laid out the case methodically. Marriage fraud, identity theft, financial abuse, tax evasion, embezzlement from client accounts. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will hear testimony about a man who viewed the women in his life as resources to be exploited. You will hear evidence of systematic, calculated abuse designed not just to steal money, but to destroy the victim's sense of self-worth and reality. Caspian's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive ex-wife seeking revenge, but it was hard to make that argument stick when 6 other women testified to similar experiences. When Angela Reed took the stand and calmly recounted years of lies and manipulation. When Caspian's own secretary confirmed that he'd been stealing from client accounts. When Rachel testified, still in her dress uniform, the courtroom was completely silent. "Colonel Howard," the prosecutor said, "can you describe what you observed when you returned from deployment?" "I observed my sister being systematically destroyed by someone who was supposed to love and protect her. I observed a predator who had isolated his victims so completely that she blamed herself for his abuse." "And what did you do about it?" Rachel's smile was sharp. "I gathered intelligence. I documented evidence. I protected my family." "Objection," Caspian's lawyer called out. "The witness is not qualified to make determinations about abuse or..." "Sustained," the judge said, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Rachel's expression when she looked at Caspian, the cold assessment of a soldier identifying a threat. On the 3rd day of testimony, Caspian's lawyer made a fatal mistake. He put Caspian on the stand. "Mr. Mitchell, can you explain to the jury why you spoke about your wife in such disparaging terms that night at Marcello's?" Caspian straightened his tie, the gesture I'd once found endearing now making my skin crawl. "I was frustrated. Tanya and I had been having problems for years. He was difficult to live with. Very emotional, very needy. I said things I shouldn't have said, but I was at the end of my rope." "Can you elaborate on these difficulties?" "She was always questioning me, always demanding to know where I'd been and what I was doing. She called me multiple times a day at work, disrupting meetings. She was obsessively jealous of any woman I spoke to." I felt Rachel tense beside me. This was Caspian's last gambit, turning his victims into villains, making his abuse sound like reasonable responses to unreasonable behavior. "Mr. Mitchell," Prosecutor Reyes said when she cross-examined him, "you testified that your wife called you multiple times a day at work. Is that accurate?" Yes, constantly. It was very disruptive. I'd like to present Exhibit 47, your phone records from the past 2 years. The courtroom was quiet as she walked him through the records call by call. According to these records, your wife called you once per day, usually around lunchtime for an average duration of 3 minutes. Does that sound like harassment to you? Caspian's face flushed. Well, it felt like more. Mr. Mitchell, you also testified that your wife was obsessively jealous of women you spoke to. Can you give us specific examples? She didn't like me working with female colleagues. Did she ever ask you not to work with female colleagues? Not directly, but did she ever prevent you from attending work functions where women would be present? She would get upset. Mr. Mitchell, yes or no? Did your wife ever prevent you from interacting with female colleagues? Caspian's mouth opened and closed. No, but in fact, according to testimony from your colleagues, your wife regularly attended firm's social events and was described as charming and supportive. Isn't that correct? I suppose. And Mr. Mitchell, you testified that you were at the end of your rope regarding your marriage. Is that why you opened multiple credit cards in your wife's name without her knowledge? I needed. Is that why you told your business partner that your wife was mentally unstable and might need to be institutionalized? Caspian's lawyer was objecting frantically, but the damage was done. Caspian had walked into a trap of his own making and everyone in the courtroom could see it. Is that why you embezzled $47,000 from your law firm's client accounts? That has nothing to do with. Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to ask you directly. If your wife was as difficult and unreasonable as you claim, why didn't you simply divorce her? The question hung in the air like poison. Caspian's mouth worked soundlessly for several seconds. Because, he said finally, his voice barely audible, I needed the money. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Caspian's lawyer buried his head in his hands. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Vindication. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Caspian was sentenced to 8 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all his victims, a sum that totaled more than $300,000. His law license was permanently revoked. His assets were frozen and would be liquidated to pay damages. But more than the legal consequences, Caspian had lost something more precious. His reputation, his family, his future. He would be forever known as the man who was exposed in a viral video as an abusive fraud. As the court officers led him away in handcuffs, he finally looked at me. For just a moment, I saw not the manipulator who'd controlled my life for 5 years, but a small, pathetic man who'd gambled everything on his ability to destroy someone who loved him. He'd lost. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions at me, but I ignored them. Rachel and I walked to her car in silence, both of us processing the end of a nightmare that had consumed months of our lives. How do you feel? She asked as we drove away. I considered the question seriously. How did I feel? Relief, certainly. Vindication, yes. But something else too, something I hadn't expected. Free, I said finally. For the first time in 5 years, I feel free. 6 months after the trial, I was back in my classroom, teaching a new group of kindergartners how to tie their shoes and share toys. But I was different now, stronger, more confident, unafraid to take up space in the world. My students noticed the change. Miss Howard, you seem happier, 5-year-old Emma told me one day during story time. Do I? Yeah. You smile more now. Like real smiles. Out of the mouths of babes. Rachel had been assigned to a new posting stateside. Close enough to visit regularly, far enough away to have her own life. She was dating a fellow officer, a kind man who made her laugh. You know what I realized? Rachel said during one of her visits. He chose the wrong family to mess with. How do you mean? The Howard women don't break. We bend, we adapt, we survive. But we don't break. He was right. I'd spent so long thinking of myself as Caspian's victim, as someone who'd been broken by his abuse, that I'd forgotten who I was before him. The daughter of 2 brilliant doctors. The little sister of a special forces officer. A woman who'd chosen to spend her life shaping young minds and hearts. I wasn't a mistake. I never had been. 2 years after the trial, I received an unexpected phone call. Miss Howard, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I'm working on a follow-up story about your case. and I wondered if you'd be willing to comment on some recent developments. What developments? Caspian Mitchell was released on parole last week. He's been trying to rebuild his reputation, claiming that he was the victim of a vindictive ex-wife and a biased legal system. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the old fear trying to reassert itself. But it passed quickly, replaced by something steadier. What would you like me to comment on? Well, it seems his attempts at rehabilitation have hit a snag. The video of his confession at Marcello's has resurfaced on social media. It's gone viral again, bigger than before. And several of his former victims have started a blog documenting the patterns of manipulation used by financial predators in relationships. I smiled. Good for them. There's more. His mother, Margaret Mitchell, has established a scholarship fund in your name at the local university. It's for women who are returning to education after leaving abusive relationships. I had to sit down. Mrs. Mitchell and I had exchanged a few letters over the years, formal, polite correspondence that had gradually warmed into something approaching friendship. But this was completely unexpected. She wanted me to tell you, Jennifer continued, that she hopes this helps other women avoid what you went through. She wanted to make sure something good came from her son's actions. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd made countless dinners for a man who saw my love as weakness, and thought about the strange paths that lead us to redemption. Caspian had spent 5 years trying to convince me I was nothing. He'd failed spectacularly and publicly. But more than that, his very attempts to destroy me had led to something larger than either of us. Awareness, resources, protection for other women. My phone rang again. This time it was Rachel. Did you see the news? She asked without preamble. About Caspian? About the scholarship. Mom and Dad would be so proud, Tanya. Their daughter's name on a scholarship helping other women find their strength. It's Margaret Mitchell's money. But it's your story that inspired it. Your courage that made it possible. That evening I walked through my neighborhood, the same streets I'd once hurried down with my head lowered, afraid of drawing attention to myself. Now I waved to neighbors, stopped to chat with the elderly man who walked his ancient beagle every evening, helped a young mother carry her stroller up the stairs to her apartment. I was no longer trying to make myself smaller. As I reached my front porch, I found a package waiting for me. No return address, just my name written in careful script. Inside was a framed photo. The graduation picture Rachel had shown me months ago, the one where I was grinning at the camera with my arms raised in victory. Someone had written on the back, "You were never a mistake. You were always magnificent." I hung the picture on my mantle, right between photos of my parents and Rachel. A reminder of who I'd been, who I'd always been beneath the layers of doubt and fear that Caspian had wrapped around me like chains. The next morning I woke up in my own house, in my own bed with my own name on the deed and my own money in the bank. I made coffee in my own Kit Howard and got dressed for a job I loved, surrounded by children who saw me as I really was. Someone worthy of respect, attention, and love. In my purse, I carried a small card that Dr. Williams had given me at the end of our sessions together. It read, "You are not responsible for healing from trauma that someone else inflicted on you. But you are responsible for not inflicting that trauma on others." I'd kept that promise. I'd chosen healing over hatred, growth over revenge, truth over lies. Caspian Mitchell had tried to make me disappear, to turn me into nothing more than a mistake he couldn't undo. Instead, he'd helped me remember exactly who I was meant to be. And I was never going to forget again.